The mud was not merely dirt and water. It was a living, sucking thing that sought to swallow the world whole. It flew up in thick, heavy clods from the hooves of the stolen mare. Splattering against the hem of the rough wool coat Clara Whitmore had snatched from the cloakroom peg only 20 minutes ago. Beneath the coat, the layers of white silk and French lace, a dress that had cost her father more than a year's wages for a common miner, bunched and chafed, heavy with sweat and the terror of what she had done. She did not look back. To look back was to see the steeple of the Revelation Creek Chapel rising like a judgmental finger against the gray slate of the sky. To look back was to see the face of Ambrose Sterling, the man with the eyes of a dead fish and the hands of a butcher, waiting at the altar to claim her as he would a prize heifer. Clara kicked the mare's flanks, her satin slippers utterly useless in the stirrups. The horse, a roan with a wild eye and a mouth hard as iron, pinned its ears and surged forward. They were tearing through a thicket of scrub oak and sagebrush, leaving the road behind for the unpredictable terrain of the foothills. She knew the groomsmen would stick to the trails at first. They would assume a Boston girl, soft and bred for parlor games, would not dare the open wilderness. They were right about her softness, but they had underestimated her desperation. For 2 hours she rode until her thighs burned and her lungs tasted of copper. The adrenaline that had propelled her out the church side door and onto the nearest tethered horse was beginning to curdle into a cold, sick dread. The sky, previously a dull gray, was bruising purple in the west. The wind had teeth now, biting through the stolen wool coat, finding the damp silk beneath and turning it to ice against her skin. She came to the rushing dark water of the Snake River Fork. It was swollen from the early snowmelt, churning with white froth and broken branches. There was no bridge here, only a ford she had heard the ranch hands speak of once. Years ago it seemed, though she had only been in the territory for 3 weeks. "Go," she urged the mare, her voice cracking. "Please." The horse balked, dancing sideways, hooves slipping on the slick river stones. Clara made the mistake of a novice. She pulled the reins too tight while kicking for speed. The mare reared, a terrified squeal cutting through the roar of the water, and twisted in the air. Clara was thrown. The world spun, sky, water, rock, and then the ground rose up to meet her with the force of a hammer strike. She hit the rocky bank hard, the breath driven from her body in a gasp of agony. Her head cracked against a stone, and darkness flooded her vision for a moment, sharp and absolute. When she drifted back to consciousness, the light was failing. The roar of the river was deafening. She tried to push herself up, but a scream tore from her throat. Her right leg, twisted at an unnatural angle beneath the heavy skirts, throbbed with a blinding heat. She scrambled to her elbows, scanning the bank. "Horse," she croaked. "Here, girl." But the bank was empty. The mare was gone. And with her, the saddlebags containing the dried beef, the canteen, and the heavy woolen blanket Clara had managed to steal along with the coat. She was alone. The realization hit her harder than the fall. She was 10 miles, perhaps 20, from the nearest settlement that wasn't the one she had just fled. She was wearing a wedding dress and a stolen coat. She had no weapon, no food, and the temperature was dropping with the speed of a guillotine blade. Clara dragged herself toward the tree line, grabbing at roots and muddy stones, her fingernails breaking, the silk of her dress tearing with every inch gained. The white fabric was now stained brown and rust red, heavy with the river water that had soaked the hem. Rain began to fall, not the gentle rain of a Massachusetts spring, but the hard, stinging sleet of the high frontier. It turned the ground to ice. Clara huddled beneath the overhang of a fallen pine, pulling the coat tighter, her teeth chattering so violently her jaw ached. "I will die here," she thought, the clarity of it terrifying. "I will freeze to death in a wedding dress, and Ambrose will find my bones and laugh." That thought, the image of Ambrose Sterling standing over her frozen corpse, a smirk on his pale, waxy face, ignited a spark in the center of her chest. It was a small, angry flame, but it was enough to make her move. She crawled, She crawled until her hands were raw and bleeding. She crawled until the night was total and absolute. A darkness so thick it felt like velvet pressed against her eyes. She moved toward the scent of pine resin and something else, something faint and acrid on the wind. Smoke. It was a ghost of a smell. Whisked away by the gale as soon as she caught it. But it was there. Someone was burning wood. She dragged her injured leg, biting her lip until she tasted blood to keep from crying out. The terrain grew steeper, rising into the timberline where the trees stood like black sentinels against the storm. Every movement was a battle. The wind howled, sounding like voices, like the angry shouts of her father, the weeping of her mother. Clara pushed the voices away. She focused on the smell. A flicker of orange. It appeared through the driving sleet like a star fallen to earth. A fire. A camp. She reached the edge of a small clearing. A canvas tent, battered and gray, stood staked against the wind. A mule was tethered beneath a lean-to of branches, head down against the cold. A large, dark shape of a dog lifted its head, ears pricking. Clara tried to stand, to call out, to beg for help, but her body had nothing left to give. The world tilted on its axis. The orange firelight blurred into a long, smearing streak. Her knees buckled, and she pitched forward into the snow and mud, the darkness claiming her before she even hit the ground. Elias Boone was not a man who startled easily. 10 years in the army and another 5 trapping in the high country had stripped the jumpiness out of him, replacing it with a cold, hard caution. He sat inside the opening of his tent, a tin cup of coffee warming his hands, listening to the storm batter the canvas. Barnaby, his mixed-breed wolfhound, let out a low, rumbling growl from where he lay near the fire pit. The dog did not bark. Barnaby only barked when he wanted to play. When there was a threat, he went silent. Elias set the cup down on a flat rock. He reached for the Sharps rifle leaning against his saddle, his movement slow and deliberate. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his voice a gravelly rasp from days of disuse. Barnaby stood, hackles raised, staring into the blackness beyond the firelight. Elias moved into the storm. The wind hit him like a physical blow, smelling of ice and pine needles. He scanned the perimeter, his eyes adjusting to the dark. A bear, perhaps. A cougar stalking the mule. Then he saw it. A heap of dark wool on the edge of the clearing, motionless. He approached with the rifle raised, thumb on the hammer. It looked like a discarded pack, or perhaps a dead animal left by a predator. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved itself. A boot, a small, leather riding boot, scuffed and muddy, sticking out from the pile. Elias lowered the rifle and knelt. He pulled back the collar of the oversized coat. Pale skin, a woman. Her hair was matted with leaves and mud, indistinguishable in color in the dark. But her face was stark white, her lips blue. Hell. Elias swore softly. He checked for a pulse at her neck. It was there, fluttering like a trapped bird. Faint and erratic. She was freezing to death. He didn't waste time looking for others. If there were others, they would have shown themselves. This woman was alone. He scooped her up, surprised by how little she weighed despite the heavy wet wool. She felt fragile, like a hollow-boned bird. He carried her into the tent, kicking the flap closed behind him to shut out the gale. He laid her on top of his bedroll, a stack of buffalo hides and wool blankets. The heat inside the small space was immediate, trapped by the canvas and the small iron stove he kept burning. Elias went to work. He unbuttoned the coarse coat and peeled it back. He paused. Beneath the filthy, beggar-like coat, the woman was wearing a gown fit for a coronation. White silk, now ruined with mud and blood, shimmered in the lantern light. Lace as delicate as spider webs covered her throat and bodice. It was a wedding dress. "Well now," Elias muttered, sitting back on his heels. "Where did you run from, little bird?" She didn't stir. Her breathing was shallow, ragged hitches that rattled in her chest. He knew he had to get the wet clothes off her, or the fever would take her before morning. It was a matter of survival, not propriety. But Elias felt a strange hesitation. He was a man who had seen the worst of humanity. who had killed men and skinned beasts. But touching this delicate creature felt like handling a loaded explosive. He worked quickly, his large, calloused hands surprisingly deft. He used his hunting knife to slice the laces of the bodice when they refused to unknot. He stripped away the sodden silk, the layers of petticoats heavy with water, until she was left in her chemise and corset. He saw the injury then. Her right leg was swollen, the skin purple and tight around the ankle and shin. A bad sprain, maybe a hairline fracture, but not a clean break. He had seen worse. He wrapped her tightly in the buffalo robes, tucking the fur around her chin until only her face was visible. He took a cloth, dipped it in the warm water from the kettle on the stove, and wiped the mud from her forehead. She was young, 20, maybe. Her features were fine, aristocratic, high cheekbones, a nose that had never been broken, skin that had clearly never known a day of hard labor in the sun. She was money. She was from the East Coast, and she was in trouble. Elias Boone wanted nothing to do with trouble. He had come to the mountains to escape it, to escape the noise of civilization and the memories of the war that still woke him up in a cold sweat. He poured a fresh cup of coffee and sat cross-legged near the tent flap, watching her. He noted the quality of the corset he had left on her. Silk embroidery, whalebone stays, expensive. "You didn't walk here from Boston," he said to the unconscious woman. Barnaby squeezed into the tent, shaking the snow from his coat, and curled up at the woman's feet, resting his heavy head on the buffalo robe. "Traitor," Elias whispered to the dog. He didn't sleep. He sat watch, listening to the storm rage and the woman's breathing slowly even out. The panic came 3 hours later. Clara was running. She was running down the aisle of the church, but the aisle was a river of mud, and the pews were teeth. Ambrose was behind her, his laugh sounding like the breaking of bones. He reached out a hand, a giant hand made of stone. She woke with a gasp that tore her throat raw. She was trapped. Something heavy and furry was pinning her down. It was hot, dark. The smell was wrong. Tobacco, wet dog, unwashed wool. She thrashed, kicking out with her good leg, a scream building in her chest. "Easy," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows. Clara scrambled backward, pressing herself against the canvas wall of the tent. "Get away!" she shrieked. "Don't touch me!" The figure in the corner did not move. He sat perfectly still, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the stove embers. He did not lunge. He did not shout. He simply held up his hands, palms open, resting them on his knees. "I ain't touching you," the voice said. It was calm, flat, devoid of the aggression she expected. "You're safe. You're in a tent. I'm Elias Boone," Clara panted, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked around wildly. The buffalo robes, the stove. The dog raised its head to look at her with bored brown eyes. She looked down at herself. She was wrapped in fur, but she could feel that her dress was gone. My clothes," she stammered, clutching the robe to her throat. "Wet," the man said. "Ruined. Had to get 'em off or you'd be dead of the cold by now. They're drying by the fire outside. What's left of 'em?" Clara stared at him. The light was dim, but she could see the outline of him now. Broad shoulders, a beard that obscured half his face, a hat pulled low. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Like I said, Elias Boone." He picked up a stick and poked the stove, sending a shower of sparks up the flue. "You fell near my camp. The dog heard you." Clara's memory fractured and reformed. The ride, the river, the cold. "I have to go," she said, trying to sit up. Pain shot up her leg, sharp and white-hot. She cried out, falling back onto the furs. "You ain't going nowhere on that leg," Elias said. He reached for a tin canteen and tossed it gently onto the bedding near her hand. "Drink. It's water." Clara looked at the canteen, then at him. She was thirsty, a deep, dusty thirst that coated her tongue. She uncorked it and drank. The water was metallic and lukewarm, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. "Thank you," she said, her voice small. "Don't thank me yet." Elias grunted. "Storm's got us socked in. You're stuck here till it breaks. He leaned back against his saddle, tipping his hat over his eyes. Go back to sleep, lady. I ain't gonna bother you. Clara watched him for a long time, her hand gripping the hidden knife she didn't have, the weapon she wished she possessed. But the man didn't move. His breathing deepened into a rhythmic rasp. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her under again, but this time, she dreamed of nothing. Morning brought a light that was blindingly white. It filtered through the canvas, sharp and cold. Clara woke to the smell of frying bacon and strong coffee. Her stomach gave a violent growl. She pushed herself up, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs. Her ankle was wrapped in a clean strip of linen, a bandage that looked suspiciously like it had been torn from one of her petticoats. The tent flap opened. Elias Boone ducked inside. By daylight, he was even more terrifying. He was a mountain of a man, wearing buckskins that were stained with grease and old blood. His face was a map of scars, one jagged white line running from his temple to his jaw, vanishing into the thick, dark beard. His eyes were the color of flint, hard and unreadable. He held out a tin cup. Coffee, black, ain't got no sugar. Clara took the cup, her fingers trembling slightly. Thank you. He sat on a crate opposite her, watching her over the rim of his own cup. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, his gaze dissecting her, peeling back the layers of her defense. Clara started, clearing her throat. She needed a story. She couldn't tell him the truth. A man like this would turn her in for a reward in a heartbeat. My name is Sarah Miller. Elias didn't blink. I was traveling with my aunt, she continued, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. To Oregon. We were separated in the storm. I fell from my horse and lost my way. Elias took a slow sip of his coffee. He looked at the pile of drying clothes in the corner, the tattered remains of the silk wedding gown. Your aunt let you ride through the mountains in a silk ball gown. Did she? He asked. His voice wasn't mocking, just dry. Clara flushed. It was all I had cleaned. The wagons we were attacked by Indians. Elias raised an eyebrow. Indians? In this valley? Haven't been to a war party here in 2 years. Most of them are on the reservation or moved north. Clara tightened her grip on the cup. Well, it was bandits then. I don't know. I was scared. Uh-huh. Elias set his cup down. He pulled a knife from his belt and began to slice a chunk of cured meat. Listen, lady, I don't care who you are. I don't care who you're running from. But don't insult my intelligence. You're a runaway bride. That much is plain as the nose on my face. Clara went rigid. And judging by the quality of that lace, Elias continued, pointing with the tip of the knife, the man you ran from has money, which means he has men, and men with money don't like losing their property. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Are you going to take me back? Elias chewed the meat slowly. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the terror behind the defiance in her green eyes. He saw the bruise on her temple, the trembling of her hands. I ain't a lawman, he said finally. And I ain't a bounty hunter. I'm a trapper. I got lines to check. He stood up, towering over her in the small space. You can stay. One night. Storm's supposed to clear by tomorrow. You rest that leg. Tomorrow. You figure out your own path. One night, Clara repeated. Thank you. Don't get comfortable, Elias warned. This ain't a hotel, and I ain't your savior. He grabbed his rifle and ducked out of the tent. Clara breathed out, a shuddering exhale. She was safe. For now. Throughout the day, she drifted in and out of sleep. She heard Elias outside, chopping wood, talking low to the dog. She managed to hobble to the entrance once, looking out at the camp. It was primitive, brutal in its simplicity. A fire pit, a lean-to for the supplies, the mule chewing on bark. The mountains rose around them like the teeth of a trap, jagged and white with snow. It was beautiful, and it was deadly. When night fell again, Elias returned. He brought a plate of beans and bacon, which Clara ate with her fingers, famished. I'll sleep by the fire, Elias announced, grabbing a single blanket from the stack. But it's freezing, Clara said, looking at the canvas walls rippling in the wind. I've slept in worse, he said. You take the tent, keep the stove fed. If you let it go out, you'll freeze, and I won't dig a grave in frozen ground. He left her there, alone in the warmth he had provided. Clara lay back on the buffalo robes, the smell of him, tobacco and pine, clinging to the furs. She felt a strange, confusing pang of gratitude toward this gruff, scarred stranger. He knew she was lying. He knew she was trouble, and yet he was sleeping in the snow so she could have a roof. 10 miles to the east, the moon broke through the storm clouds, illuminating a muddy trail that wound through the scrub brush. 3 men sat on horseback, their slickers dripping with melting sleet. They were hard men, with faces worn by wind and violence. The leader, a man named Silas Vance, swung down from his saddle. He walked to a cluster of thorn bushes near the riverbank. He struck a match, shielding the flame with his cupped hand. There, snagged on a wicked thorn, was a shred of fabric. He pulled it free. It was white silk, ruined by mud, but unmistakable. He rubbed it between his thumb and forefinger, feeling the quality of the weave. "Well?" one of the other men asked, his voice muffled by a scarf. Silas blew out the match. He looked west, toward the timberline where the mountains began their ascent. "It's her," Silas said softly. "She crossed here. Horse lost its footing by the look of the tracks. She's on foot." He swung back into his saddle, the leather creaking. He patted the neck of his horse. "She can't have gone far, not in this weather, not in a dress like that." He looked at the dark peaks ahead. "We'll find her by noon," Silas promised. "And Mr. Sterling said he wants her back alive. He didn't say anything about being unbruised." The men turned their horses west, following the faint, dragging tracks in the mud that the freezing ground had preserved like a cast. They were moving fast, and Clara was only hours ahead. Dawn arrived not as a burst of glory, but as a gray, suffusing bruise upon the eastern horizon. The storm had broken, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt heavy, pressing down on the snow-laden boughs of the ponderosa pines. The air was brittle with cold, the kind that snapped in the lungs and turned breath into thick, lingering clouds of steam. Clara Whitmore lay awake in the dim light of the tent, listening to the rhythmic crunch of boots on snow outside. Elias was already up. She could hear the metallic clatter of a coffee pot against the iron stove and the low murmur of his voice speaking to the dog. She sat up, wincing as her ankle throbbed in protest. The pain was a dull, hot ache, but it was manageable. What was not manageable was the fear that had settled in her gut like a stone. She could not stay here. This man, this Elias Boone, had been kind enough to pull her from the snow, but he was a stranger, a rough creature of the wild who looked at her with eyes that saw too much, and behind her, somewhere in the white vastness, Ambrose Sterling's men were hunting. She threw off the buffalo robes. She was wearing a flannel shirt Elias must have left for her. It swallowed her frame, the cuffs hanging past her fingertips, and a pair of canvas trousers she had cinched with a piece of rope. They smelled of wood smoke and pine resin. "I have to move," she told herself. "I have to keep moving." She grabbed the crude crutch Elias had fashioned from a branch the night before, using it to brace herself. She hopped toward the tent flap and pushed into the biting morning air. The cold hit her like a slap. Elias was by the fire, crouched over a skillet, his back to her. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat, his breath pluming in the air. Clara didn't speak. She turned away from the camp, aiming her body toward the slope leading down to the valley floor. If she could just reach the tree line, perhaps she could find a road. Perhaps she could find a wagon. She took one step, the crutch sinking into the crust of the snow. She took another. Her injured leg dragged, heavy and useless. "You won't make a mile." Elias's voice drifted over, flat and unconcerned. Clara ignored him. She set her jaw and forced another step. The snow was deeper here, hiding roots and rocks. The tip of her crutch slipped on a patch of hidden ice. She flailed, trying to catch her balance. but her good leg buckled under the sudden shift in weight. She went down hard, face first into the snowbank. The cold bit into her cheeks, shocking and sharp. For a moment, she just lay there, the wind whistling in her ears, humiliation burning hotter than the frost. Heavy footsteps crunched toward her. Then, strong hands gripped her under the arms and hauled her upright as if she weighed no more than a sack of grain. Elias spun her around, steadying her against his chest. "Done?" he asked. Clara shoved at him, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "Let me go. I don't need your help. I need to leave." "And where?" Elias demanded, his voice rising, cracking the morning stillness. "Look around you, woman. There is nothing out here but snow, wolves, and dying. You got no horse, no gun, no food, and a leg that can't hold weight. You walk out of this camp. You're dead before sundown." "I'd rather die than go back," Clara screamed, the sound raw and tearing in her throat. "You don't understand. You don't know what they'll do." "I don't care what they'll do," Elias roared back, his patience snapping. "I care that I ain't dragging a frozen corpse off my mountain tomorrow morning because you're too foolish to know when you're beat." They stood there, chest to chest, breathing hard, clouds of steam mingling between them. Clara glared up at him, trembling not from cold but from rage. He was a brute, a giant, unfeeling wall of a man. "You are a cruel, heartless brute," she hissed. "And you are a foolish little girl playing at survival," Elias countered, his eyes hard as flint. "But I ain't gonna let you kill yourself on my watch." He released her, stepping back but keeping a wary eye on her balance. "Eat," he commanded, pointing to the fire. "We break camp in 1 hour. I'll take you as far as Silver Creek. It is a 2-day ride. From there, you can catch a stagecoach anywhere you damn well please." Clara blinked, the fight draining out of her as the offer registered. You'll guide me?" "I'm heading that way to trade furs." Elias lied smoothly, though his traps were nowhere near full. "But here's the deal. You don't tell a soul where you found me. You don't tell him my name, and you don't mention this camp. I want to be left alone. You understand?" Clara looked at him. He was offering her a lifeline, a way out that didn't involve freezing to death. She swallowed her pride. "I understand," she said softly. "I promise." "Good." Elias grunted. "Now eat. You look like a stiff wind would blow you over." The journey began under a sky the color of hammered iron. Elias packed the mule with a practiced, brutal efficiency, lashing the furs and supplies down tight. He lifted Clara onto the animal's back, settling her amidst the packs. It was an uncomfortable perch, but it kept her off her leg. They moved through the high country, a world of stark contrasts: black rock, white snow, green pine. The wind was relentless, a constant, keening wail that cut through Clara's borrowed coat. Elias walked ahead, leading the mule, his head bent against the gale, the Sharps rifle slung over his shoulder. Barnaby, the wolfhound, trotted at his heel, stopping occasionally to sniff the air with a low growl. By midday, the terrain grew treacherous. They entered a dense forest where the trees grew so thick they blocked out the weak sun. The snow here was deep and powdery, drifting against the trunks. "Keep your eyes open," Elias called back over his shoulder. "Wolves have been moving through this valley." "They're hungry this time of year." Clara gripped the pommel of the pack saddle, her knuckles white. Every shadow seemed to move. Every snap of a twig sounded like a predator. She watched Elias, marveling at how he moved. He was a big man, yet he made almost no sound. He read the ground like she read a novel, noting broken branches, disturbed snow, the flight of birds. They came to the river in the early afternoon. It was a churning ribbon of gray water, swollen and angry, cutting across their path. Blocks of ice bobbed in the current, clinking together with the sound of breaking glass. Elias stopped. He studied the water, his face grim. "Bridge washed out 2 years ago," he muttered. "We have to fork it." He turned to Clara. "Stay on the mule. Lift your legs high. Buster is sure-footed, but the current is strong. If he goes down, you kick free. You understand? Do not let the packs drag you under." Clara nodded. terror seizing her throat. "I understand." Elias waded in first. The water rose to his thighs, freezing and fast. He gritted his teeth, leading the mule by the halter. Clara gasped as the animal stepped in, the icy water splashing against her boots. The mule groaned, its hooves slipping on the river stones. Halfway across, the current surged. A large chunk of ice slammed into the mule's flank. Buster stumbled, braying in panic. Clara lurched to the side, nearly falling into the roiling water. "Hold on!" Elias shouted. He dropped the lead rope and lunged, grabbing the mule's harness with one hand and steadying Clara with the other. His grip was iron. He shoved against the current, using his own weight to anchor the animal. "Hiya! Move up!" They scrambled up the opposite bank, wet and shivering, mud slicking the slope. Elias didn't stop until they were well clear of the water. He bent over, hands on his knees, coughing. His trousers were soaked, freezing rapidly in the air. Clara looked down at him, her heart hammering. He had risked being swept away to keep her dry. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias straightened, wiping water from his beard. He didn't look at her. "Don't thank me. Just keep moving. We need to make the ridge before dark." Camp that night was a miserable affair, pitched in the lee of a granite overhang to escape the wind. Elias worked with a furious intensity, gathering wood, stripping wet bark to find the dry heart underneath. Clara, feeling useless and guilty as she watched him limp slightly on his frozen legs, slid off the mule. She grabbed the small hatchet from the pack. "Give me that," she said, reaching for a pile of branches. Elias looked at her, surprised. "You'll chop your own foot off." "I am not an invalid." "Mr. Boone," Clara snapped, though her teeth were chattering. "I can chop wood. You get the fire started." She was clumsy, her swings lacking the rhythmic grace of a woodsman. But she persisted. She broke the branches down into kindling, her hands stinging with the impact, ignoring the blisters forming on her palms. When Elias returned with a dead rabbit he had pulled from a snare, she took it from him. I don't know how to skin it," she admitted, looking at the limp, gray fur. "But if you show me, I will cook it." Elias paused. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the determination set in her jaw. She was shivering, her face pale and pinched with cold, but she wasn't cowering in the blankets. "Watch," he said. He showed her how to make the cut, how to pull the pelt free. It was gruesome work, blood warm and sticky on her fingers. But Clara didn't look away. She gutted the animal, skewered it, and set it over the fire she had helped build. As the meat roasted, filling the air with a savory scent, the tension between them shifted. It wasn't gone, but the sharp edges had softened. Elias sat back, drying his socks by the fire. He watched her turn the spit. "You learn quickly," he said. "For a Boston girl." "I had to learn a lot of things quickly recently," Clara murmured. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a bottle of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the firelight. He pulled the cork with his teeth and took a long pull, shuddering as it went down. He held the bottle out to her. "Take the chill off," he said. Clara hesitated, then took it. She had never drunk spirits straight, only watered-down sherry in polite parlors. She tipped the bottle back. The whiskey burned like liquid fire, searing her throat and settling warm and heavy in her stomach. She coughed, eyes watering, but handed it back with a nod. "Strong," she rasped. "Cheap," Elias corrected with a half-smile. They ate in silence for a while, sharing the rabbit and some hardtack biscuits. The fire crackled, creating a small sphere of light in the immense darkness. "Why did you run?" Elias asked suddenly. It wasn't an accusation this time. It was a question born of silence. Clara stared into the flames. "He bought me," she said quietly. "Ambrose Sterling, he didn't ask for my hand. He negotiated a price with my father like he was buying a parcel of land for his railroad." She took another sip of the whiskey, the alcohol loosening the knot in her chest. "He has cold eyes," she whispered. "Dead eyes. The first time we met, he looked at me and he didn't see a person. He saw a broodmare. He checked my teeth. He squeezed my arm to check the muscle." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "He told me that if I displeased him, he had ways of making me compliant. He showed me his cane. It had a silver head, weighted with lead." Elias went still. His hand tightened around the whiskey bottle until his knuckles turned white. "My father is a good man, but he is weak," Clara continued, her voice trembling. "He owes the Sterlings money. Thousands. I was the payment. The debt cleared for the daughter." She looked up at Elias, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I couldn't do it. I stood in that church, and I saw the rest of my life. A cage. A velvet-lined cage where I would be beaten until I stopped screaming. So I ran." Elias stared at the fire, his jaw working. "A man who beats a woman ain't a man," he said low in his throat. "He's a dog that needs putting down." "I was humiliated," Clara said, wiping her cheek. "Every day for a month. Paraded around, touched, assessed." "You ain't livestock," Elias said firmly. "I felt like it." "Well, you ain't." He took a drink. "You got grit. I saw men fold under less than what you did today." Clara looked at him, surprised by the praise. "And you? Why are you out here alone, Elias? You're smart. You're capable. Why hide in a tent at the edge of the world?" Elias gave a harsh laugh. He touched the scar on his face. "I ain't hiding. I'm serving a sentence." "For what?" "For being alive." He stared into the dark. "I fought for the Union, 3rd Colorado. We thought we were heroes, saving the Republic." He spat into the fire. "War ain't heroic. It's just murder with a flag." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "After the war, my brother, Samuel, he wanted to come west. Said there was gold in the San Juans. I told him it was dangerous. I told him the treaties were broken and the tribes were angry, but he wouldn't listen, and I couldn't let him go alone." His voice dropped to a whisper. "We were ambushed, Apache, just south of the jagged peaks. It was over in minutes. I took a lance to the face. He traced the jagged line of the scar. Sam took an arrow to the throat. I watched him die. Clara, I watched the light go out of his eyes while I lay there bleeding in the dirt, unable to lift a rifle to save him." "It wasn't your fault," Clara said softly. "I was the older brother," Elias said, the self-loathing thick in his voice. "It was my job to bring him home. I buried him in a shallow grave and I kept walking. Been walking ever since. I ain't fit for people. I bring death." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the ghosts they had both summoned. Clara moved then. She moved closer to him on the log. The heat of the fire was between them, but she reached across it. She lifted her hand and, with a trembling finger, touched the white, raised ridge of the scar on his cheek. Elias froze. He didn't flinch, but his breath hitched. "It does not make you a monster," she whispered. Her fingertips were rough from the day's work, but her touch was impossibly gentle. "It shows you survived. You're not ugly to me, Elias." The air in the camp changed. It grew charged, electric. Elias turned his head slowly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. In the firelight, the harshness of his face softened. He looked lost. He looked hungry. Clara leaned in. She didn't know why. Perhaps it was the whiskey. Perhaps it was the shared survival, or perhaps it was simply that for the first time in her life, she felt safe with a man. They kissed. It was tentative at first, a brushing of lips, tasting of smoke and spirits. Then, something broke. Elias made a low sound in his throat and leaned into her, his mouth capturing hers with a desperate, starving intensity. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her matted hair. For a moment, the cold world vanished. There was only the heat of him, the roughness of his beard, the solid strength of his body. Clara melted against him, her hands gripping the lapels of his coat. Then, just as suddenly, Elias pulled back. He scrambled away from her, nearly knocking over the whiskey bottle. He stood up, breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked at her with wide, panicked eyes. "No," he rasped. "No, I can't." Clara sat there, lips swollen, confused. "Elias?" "You're vulnerable," he said, his voice rough. "You're scared and you're running and you don't know what you're doing. I ain't gonna be another man taking something from you just because he can." "I wanted it," Clara said, her voice shaking. "You don't know what you want," Elias said, turning his back to her. "Get some sleep. We ride at dawn." He walked away from the fire, out into the darkness beyond the light, leaving Clara alone with the crackling embers and the taste of him on her lips. While Clara and Elias slept under the watchful silence of the mountains, the world below was noisy with the machinery of pursuit. 20 miles back, in a muddy hollow where two trails intersected, Silas Vance sat by a campfire. Across from him sat a peddler, a nervous little man with a cart full of pots and pans and snake oil. The peddler was sweating despite the cold, his eyes darting between the 3 armed men surrounding him. "I told you," the peddler stammered. "I saw a girl 2 days ago, near the river fork." "Describe her," Silas said, sharpening his knife on a whetstone. "Scritch, scritch, scritch." "Small," the peddler said. "Reddish hair, like polished copper. She was riding a roan mare. It looked like she was in a hurry, didn't stop to buy nothing." Silas smiled. It was a cold, mirthless expression. He stopped sharpening the knife and pointed it at the peddler. "Was she wearing a coat?" "Yeah, big wool thing, too big for her." "And underneath?" The peddler frowned. "Couldn't see much, but I saw the hem of her dress when the wind kicked up. White, fancy stuff, muddy as hell." Silas sheathed the knife. He reached into his pocket and tossed a silver dollar to the peddler. "You've been helpful," Silas said. He stood up, looking at his men. "Saddle up. The tracks we found were real. She's heading for the pass." "The storm covered the trail, boss," one of the men grumbled. "She's a city girl," Silas said, swinging onto his horse. "She'll head for the nearest town. That's Silver Creek. We cut through the gorge. We can beat her there." He spurred his horse, the animal leaping forward into the night. The hunt was no longer a guessing game. It was a race, and Silas Vance intended to win. The high country did not tolerate weakness, and it did not care for the fragility of human sentiment. It was a landscape of granite and ice, demanding a toll for every mile traversed. Yet, in the crucible of that freezing wilderness, the distance between Clara Whitmore and Elias Boone began to shrink, closed not by words, but by the shared, brutal necessity of survival. For 3 days, they moved south and west, skirting the tree line to avoid the deep drifts of the valleys. The wind was a constant physical assault, stinging their eyes and chapping their lips until they cracked and bled. On the second afternoon, the terrain turned treacherous. They were navigating a narrow scree slope, a ribbon of loose shale overlooking a drop of 300 feet. The mule, Buster, picked his way with the grim determination of his breed. But the ground was unstable. Elias was walking, testing the footing with the butt of his rifle. He stepped on a slab of gray slate that looked solid, but the earth beneath it had been hollowed out by the melt. The ground gave way. Elias slid. He didn't shout. He simply dropped, his boots scrambling for purchase as a cascade of rock and snow tumbled into the void. He managed to jam the rifle barrel into a crevice and arrest his fall, but his left leg twisted violently in the debris. "Elias!" Clara screamed, abandoning the mule's lead rope. She scrambled down the slope, sliding on her backside, heedless of the sharp rocks tearing at her trousers. She reached him just as he was trying to haul himself up, his face gray with pain. "Don't!" she gasped, grabbing his coat. "Let me help." "I'm fine," he grunted, though the sweat beading on his forehead in the freezing air told a different story. "You are a terrible liar," she said. She wedged her shoulder under his arm. "Lean on me, heavy now. Do not be proud." It took them 20 minutes to climb back to the trail, a distance of only 10 yards. When they finally reached level ground, Elias collapsed against a boulder, clutching his knee. Clara didn't wait for instructions. She knelt in the snow, her hands moving with a confidence that hadn't been there 3 days ago. She unlaced his heavy boot. Ignoring his hiss of protest, she probed the joint with cold fingers. "It is not broken," she announced, her voice steady. But it is badly wrecked. You need ice." "We are standing on ice. Clara!" Elias rasped, but there was a flicker of amusement in his eyes. She packed snow around the swollen joint and bound it tight with a strip of leather from the saddlebags. When she looked up, he was watching her. The hardness in his gaze had softened, replaced by a quiet, contemplative curiosity. "You have good hands," he said. "I used to bandage my father's horses when the grooms were too drunk to do it," she replied, tying off the knot. "I preferred the stables to the parlor. The horses didn't care about my marriage prospects." That night, they camped in a dense thicket of spruce. The fire was small to avoid detection, but it cast a warm, flickering glow against the dark trees. They sat close to the flames, sharing a tin of heated beans. Elias stretched his injured leg out. "You did good today," he said quietly. "I would have had a hard time getting up that slope alone." Clara smiled, and this time, it wasn't the polite, terrified smile of a society girl. It was small, tired, and genuine. "I suppose I am not just baggage after all." Elias chuckled, a rusty sound like dry leaves scraping together. "No, I suppose you ain't." The next day, the sun broke through the clouds, turning the world into a blinding sheet of diamonds. They stopped at midday in a small clearing. Elias hobbled to the pack mule and pulled a heavy leather holster from the bag. He walked over to Clara, holding the weapon out butt first. It was a dragoon pistol, heavy and scarred, the metal worn smooth by years of handling. "If we get separated," Elias said, "or if my leg gives out and I can't fight, you need to know how to use this." Clara took the gun. It was heavier than she expected, dragging her arm down. The steel was cold against her palm. "I have never fired a gun," she admitted. "Point and pull." Elias said, "But it ain't that simple. This thing kicks like a mule. You hold it loose. It will fly out of your hand and break your nose. If you hold it too tight, you'll shake and miss." He moved behind her. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a wall of heat at her back. He reached around, his large, calloused hands hovering over hers, correcting her grip. "Thumbs forward," he instructed, his voice low near her ear. "Sight down the barrel. See that dead branch on the pine, the one with the pine cone?" Clara squinted. "Yes." "Breathe in," Elias murmured. "Let half of it out. Squeeze. Don't yank." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She focused on the pine cone. She inhaled, exhaled. She squeezed the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The recoil jerked her arms up, the shock wave rattling her teeth. The smell of sulfur filled her nose. She looked at the tree. The branch was untouched. The pine cone remained defiant. "I missed," she said, disappointed. "You hit the mountain," Elias said dryly. "That is a start. Try again." They spent an hour there. Her arms ached, her ears rang. But on the sixth shot, the pine cone exploded into a cloud of splinters. "I did it!" Clara shouted. Turning to him, a grin split her face, wide, triumphant, and utterly unguarded. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, and for a moment, the fugitive bride vanished. In her place was just a woman, alive and victorious in the wild. Elias stared at her. He felt something shift in his chest, a dangerous cracking of the armor he had spent a decade forging. He had forgotten that a woman could look like that, not painted and poised, but windblown, smelling of gunpowder, and radiant with simple joy. "Yeah," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "You did it." He took the gun from her, his fingers brushing hers. The contact lingered a second too long before he turned away to pack the supplies. The days of travel had worn them down, stripping away the pretenses of civilization. By the fourth night, the temperature plummeted. The air was so cold it felt solid, pressing against the canvas of the tent. They had pitched camp in a shallow cave behind a frozen waterfall, a hiding place Elias knew from his trapping days. The fire was a meager pile of coals near the entrance. "It's going to be a two-dog night," Elias muttered, wrapping himself in his blanket. Clara lay on the buffalo robes, shivering violently. The cold seeped up from the stone floor, biting through her layers. Her teeth chattered in a staccato rhythm she couldn't control. Elias, she whispered. I can't stop shaking. Elias looked at her from across the dying fire. He saw the blue tint of her lips. Survival trumped propriety. It always did out here. Come here, he said gently. He opened his blankets. Clara hesitated only a moment before crawling across the stone. She lay down beside him, her back to his chest. He pulled the heavy buffalo robe over both of them, tucking it in tight. Body heat, he said, his voice tight. Just for warmth. I know, she whispered. But as the shivering subsided, replaced by the creeping warmth of his large frame, the nature of the silence changed. It grew heavy, charged. She could feel the slow, steady thud of his heart against her shoulder base. She could smell the wood smoke in his shirt, the scent of leather and man. He was solid, real and safe in a way she had never known. Clara turned in his arms. In the dark, his eyes were glinting, wide and searching. He didn't pull away. His breath hitched as she moved closer. Clara, he warned, a low rumble in his chest. Don't. Why? She asked, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. Because you are afraid? Because I'm a ruined man, he whispered. And you have a life to get back to. I have no life, she said. I have a sentence waiting for me. But here I am, just me. She leaned up and kissed him. This time, he didn't pull away. He made a sound, half groan, half prayer, and his arms closed around her. The restraint broke. They came together with a desperation born of the cold and the fear of tomorrow. There was no fumbling, no awkwardness, only a raw, starving need. Elias touched her as if he were terrified she would shatter, his calloused hands tracing the curve of her spine, the line of her jaw. Clara held him with a fierce strength, anchoring him to the earth, anchoring him to her. It was slow. It was wordless. It was a reclaiming of their own bodies in a world that sought to own them. Afterward, the silence returned, but it was no longer heavy. It was soft. Elias lay on his back, staring up at the stone ceiling of the cave. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, her hand idly tracing the jagged scar on his chest. I shouldn't have done that, Elias said, his voice steeped in guilt. I took advantage of you. You're scared and running, and I— Elias, Clara interrupted, rising on one elbow to look at him. I am not a child, and I am not a victim. Not tonight. You don't belong here. Clara, you don't belong with a man like me. And where do I belong? She asked. In a parlor sipping tea, waiting for a husband to tell me when I'm allowed to speak. She shook her head. I haven't felt safe in years. I haven't felt like anyone actually saw me. They saw the dress, or the dowry, or the family name. But you saw me. Elias looked at her, his expression pained. I see you, and that is why I know you deserve better. He rolled away from her, presenting his back to the fire. Clara lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind howl outside the cave, wondering if the warmth she felt was a beginning or an ending. Morning brought the answer. Clara woke to the sound of buckles clicking. The gray light of dawn filtered through the ice of the waterfall. Elias was already dressed, his movements sharp and efficient as he packed the saddlebags. What are you doing? She asked, sitting up, clutching the blanket to her chest. Getting ready, Elias said without turning around. We are 5 miles from the ridge. Once we cross it, you can see the road to Silver Creek. You can walk it in half a day. Clara went cold. We? Elias stopped. He turned to face her. His face was closed off again, the walls rebuilt overnight. You, he corrected. I'm cutting south, heading for the border. You're leaving me? Clara scrambled to her feet, ignoring the cold stone. After last night? Especially after last night, Elias said harshly. I can't keep running, Clara, and I can't drag you down into the mud with me. You have a chance. You can go to Silver Creek, get on a stage, and go to San Francisco, start over. But if you stay with me, you'll end up dead or in a cell. I don't want to go to San Francisco, Clara cried. I want to be with you. You don't know me, Elias roared, the sudden volume making the dog, Barnaby, jump. You think I'm some noble hero because I pulled you out of the snow? I ain't a hero. Clara, I'm a killer. He stepped toward her, his eyes wild. I killed men in the war, lots of them. And not just in battle. After the war. There were men who came looking for trouble. And I gave it to them. I have blood on my hands that will never wash off. I wake up screaming because I see their faces. You want that? You want to wake up next to a man who is haunted by ghosts? Yes, Clara said instantly. She stepped toward him, closing the distance. Yes, if it means I am free, I don't care about your past. Elias, I care about the man who slept in the snow to give me a tent. I care about the man who taught me to shoot so I could protect myself. She reached out, grabbing his hands. They were trembling. Please, she begged, her voice breaking. Don't abandon me. Don't make me go back to being alone. Elias looked down at her hands gripping his. The resolve in his eyes wavered. He opened his mouth to speak, to tell her that he was poisoned, that he was doing this to save her. Crack! The sound was sharp and flat, echoing off the canyon walls like a thunderclap. A puff of rock dust exploded from the cave wall, inches from Elias's head. Down! Elias shouted. He tackled Clara, throwing her to the ground behind the cover of the scattered boulders. They found us, he hissed, reaching for his rifle. Damn it! They found us! Another shot rang out, whining off the stone floor. Stay low, Elias commanded. Get to the mule, now! He rose to a crouch and fired a shot toward the tree line, providing cover. Clara scrambled on her hands and knees toward the back of the cave where Buster was tethered. The mule was stomping, eyes rolling in panic. Come on, Buster, she pleaded, untying the rope with shaking fingers. Elias fired again, working the lever of his rifle with a metallic clack-clack. Go! Move! He grabbed the mule's halter and dragged the animal toward the side exit of the cave, a narrow fissure that led up the ridge. Get up! Elias shouted, boosting Clara onto the pack saddle. He didn't have time to mount behind her. He grabbed the lead rope and slapped the mule's rump. Run! They burst out of the cave and into the sunlight. The snow was deep here, slowing them down. A shout came from the trees below. There! Take the man! A volley of gunfire erupted. Elias jerked violently as if punched by an invisible fist. He stumbled, his hand flying to his side. Elias! Clara screamed. He didn't fall. He roared in pain and adrenaline, grabbing the saddle strap to keep himself upright. Ride! Don't stop! He scrambled up the side of the mule, hauling himself up behind Clara with a groan of agony. Go! Go! He yelled, kicking the mule's flanks. The sturdy animal surged forward, crashing through the brush, carrying the double weight. They tore up the ridge, snow flying from the hooves. Clara grabbed the reins, guiding the terrified beast as they wove through the trees. She could feel Elias slumped against her back, his heavy breathing wet and ragged. His arm was wrapped around her waist, clutching her tightly. She looked down. His hand was clamped over her stomach, and between his fingers, dark, hot blood was soaking into her borrowed shirt. Hold on, Elias, she sobbed into the wind. Just hold on. Behind them, the sound of shouting men and galloping horses grew faint, but the hunt was on. They were running, not toward freedom, but deeper into the wild, leaving a trail of red drops in the pristine white snow. The ascent to the sanctuary was a blur of white agony. They rode the mule until the beast could climb no further, its chest heaving in the thin, biting air. And then they walked. Clara supported Elias's weight, her shoulder jammed into his armpit, her boots slipping on the icy scree. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone that grew hotter with every yard they gained. The bullet had not merely grazed him, it had plowed a furrow through the flesh of his side, just above the hip, and the blood had soaked through his coat, freezing into a stiff, dark armor. They found the place by luck or by the grace of a god neither of them was sure they believed in anymore. It was a deep recess in the granite face of the mountain, hidden behind a curtain of ice where a waterfall had frozen in mid-descension. The ice was thick, blue-white and opaque, muffling the world outside. Behind it, the cave was dry, smelling of old dust and the minerals of the earth. Clara collapsed, letting Elias slide gently to the stone floor. He groaned, a sound that started in his chest and ended in a sharp intake of breath. His eyes were glassy, fever-bright in the gloom. For 2 days, the world shrank to the dimensions of that stone room. Outside, the wind howled, hunting for them among the peaks. Inside, the battle was silent and terrified. Clara became the keeper of the fire, a small, smokeless flame she fed with the last of their dry kindling and dried moss scraped from the rocks. She became the water-bearer, venturing out to the edge of the ice curtain to chip away chunks of frozen snow, melting them in the tin cup over the meager flames. She made a broth from the dried beef in the saddlebags, shredding the tough meat with her fingers until it was soft enough for him to swallow. "Eat," she whispered, lifting his head. "Please, Elias, you have to eat." He drifted. The fever took him on the first night, rising like a tide. His skin was burning to the touch, dry and papery. Yet he shivered so violently his teeth clicked together. Clara stripped the bloody shirt from him, washing the angry, red-rimmed wound with heated water and the last of the whiskey. He thrashed when the alcohol touched raw flesh, his hand lashing out to grip her wrist, bruising in its intensity. "Don't," he rasped, his eyes wide, but seeing nothing. "Don't let them in. No one is here," Clara soothed, stroking the sweat-damp hair back from his forehead. "It is just me. It is just Clara." But he was not with her. He was somewhere else, some other time. "I told him to stay down," Elias muttered, his voice thick. "Julian, I told the boy to stay down." He tossed his head, his breathing ragged. "I didn't mean to. The glass broke. There was so much blood. Why is there so much blood?" Clara listened, her heart aching. She sat cross-legged beside him, her hand resting flat on his heaving chest, feeling the erratic thrum of his heart. "It was a mistake," he whispered to the ceiling of the cave. "I left. I just left. Coward. I am a coward." "You are not a coward," Clara whispered back, though she knew he could not hear her. "You are the bravest man I know." He spoke of a town called Fairwater. He spoke of a woman named Sarah who had looked at him with disgust. He spoke of a jail cell and a broken lock, piece by piece. The fragments of his delirium formed a picture of a man who had once been part of a community, who had a name and a place, until a moment of violence, a barroom brawl gone wrong, a young man dead by his hand, had shattered it all. He believed, with the feverish conviction of the damned, that he was beyond saving. Clara did not sleep. She kept her vigil. When the fire burned low, she curled her body around his, sharing her warmth, willing her own strength to flow into him. She whispered to him through the long, dark hours, telling him stories of her childhood, of the ocean she missed, of the books she had read. She told him these things to tether him to the living world, to keep him from slipping away into the dark memories that haunted him. "I am not leaving," she vowed into the silence. "You pulled me from the snow. I will not let the fire take you." On the morning of the third day, the fever broke. It happened quietly. Clara had dozed off, her head resting on his shoulder. She woke to the sensation of a hand on her hair. It was weak, the fingers trembling, but the touch was deliberate. She jerked upright. Elias was looking at her. His eyes were sunken, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. But the glassiness was gone. They were clear. They were his again. "Clara," he croaked. "You're back," she breathed, a sob catching in her throat. She reached for the canteen. "Here, drink." He drank greedily, water spilling down his beard. When he finished, he let his head fall back against the saddlebag she had used as a pillow. He looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the dark smudges under her eyes, the soot on her cheek, the way her hands shook as she capped the canteen. "How long?" he asked. 2 days, she said. "Maybe 3. I lost count of the sun." Elias tried to sit up and failed, wincing as the wound stretched. He lay back, closing his eyes for a moment. "I talked, didn't I?" "Some," Clara admitted. "About Fairwater?" "Yes." He let out a long, slow breath. "Then you know, I ain't no hero. Clara, I killed a boy. He was drunk and stupid, and I was angry and mean. I didn't mean to kill him, but dead is dead. I ran before the sheriff could hang me. Been running ever since." He turned his face away from her, toward the wall of the cave. "I told you I wasn't worth saving." Clara moved. She crawled over the cold stone until she was hovering over him. She placed her hands on either side of his face, forcing him to look at her. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice fierce. He opened his eyes. "You made a mistake," she said. "A terrible one. But you have spent 10 years punishing yourself for it. You think you are a monster. A monster would have left me in that snowbank. A monster would have turned me in for the reward money the moment he saw the lace on my dress." She leaned closer, her forehead resting against his. "I listened to you while you burned. Elias, I heard your guilt. It is heavy because you are a good man. A bad man would not care." Elias stared up at her. The defenses he had built, the walls of indifference and solitude, lay in ruins. He raised his hand, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I thought I didn't believe in redemption anymore," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought that the well had run dry a long time ago, but you stayed. You proved me wrong." Clara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "We save each other," she whispered. Then, the dam broke. The fear she had been holding back, the terror that she had pushed down to focus on his survival, came rushing up. Her shoulders began to shake. "I am so afraid," she confessed, the words tumbling out. "Elias, if they catch us, Ambrose, his family, they own everything. The judges, the sheriffs. If they take me back, I will vanish. He will lock me in that house on the hill, and I will never see the sky again. I will just be gone." She buried her face in his neck, weeping. "I don't want to disappear." Elias wrapped his arms around her, ignoring the pain in his side. He held her tightly, his strength returning with his resolve. "You ain't gonna disappear," he promised, his voice low and deadly serious. "I swear it to you. I'm gonna get you out of this territory." He looked toward the icy entrance of the cave, his eyes narrowing. "We go west," he said, "past the rail lines, past where the sterling money reaches. We go to New Mexico, or maybe all the way to California. There are places in the desert where a man and a woman can start over, where no one knows your name, and no one knows mine." "California," Clara repeated, the word sounding like a prayer. "California," Elias confirmed. "But we have to move. The fever cost us time. Vance and his men, they won't have stopped looking." They left the sanctuary the following dawn. The descent was harder than the climb. Elias was steady on his feet, but stiff. Every movement cost him, though he hid it well. Clara watched him, noting the tightness around his eyes, the way he favored his left side. They retrieved the mule from where they had tethered it in a thicket of scrub pine further down the slope. The animal was hungry and skittish, but alive. "We need to cross the ridge," Elias said, pointing to a spine of rock that cut across the skyline. "Once we are over that, we drop into the canyon lands. The rock there is hard. Don't leave tracks." They moved slowly. The sun was just cresting the peaks, painting the snow in shades of violent pink and orange. The air was utterly still. They reached the crest of the ridge. Below them, the slope fell away into a dense tangle of aspen and fir. "Almost there," Elias murmured. The crack of a rifle shattered the morning. A bullet struck the rock inches from Clara's head, spraying her with stone chips. "Ambush!" Elias roared. He shoved Clara down behind a boulder just as a second shot whined through the air where she had been standing. Below them, emerging from the timberline 300 yards away, were 3 riders. They had dismounted, using the trees for cover. "They were waiting," Elias snarled. He dragged his Sharps rifle from the scabbard on the mule. "They knew we had to cross the ridge. What do we do?" Clara cried, pressing herself into the dirt. "We fight," Elias said. "We can't outrun them on this slope." He rested the heavy barrel of the Sharps on the rock. He took a breath, held it, and fired. The boom of the big buffalo gun rolled like thunder across the valley. One of the men below, A figure in a duster coat spun around and dropped into the snow. 1. Elias counted grimly. The other two returned fire, their bullets pinging off the rocks around them. The mule screamed, reared, and tore its reins free, bolting back down the path they had come. "The supplies!" Clara gasped. "Leave it!" Elias yelled. "Keep your head down." He worked the lever, ejected the spent brass, and loaded a fresh cartridge. He waited. The remaining 2 men were moving up the slope, darting from tree to tree. They were professionals. They were closing the distance. Elias fired again. The shot went wide, kicking up snow. "Damn," he cursed. "Hand me the revolver." Clara fumbled for the heavy dragoon pistol at her belt and handed it to him. "Stay here," he ordered. "Where are you going?" "Flanking them. Keep your head down." Elias moved, despite his wound. He slid over the rocks with the grace of a predator. He vanished into a cluster of boulders to their right. Clara huddled in the snow, clutching her own small knife, the skinning knife Elias had given her days ago. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She heard shouting below. Gunfire. Then silence. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her. She looked up. A man was standing on the rock above her. He was huge, with a thick black beard and a coat made of wolf fur. It wasn't one of the men Elias had been shooting at. It was a 4th man, one who had circled around while the others drew fire. He grinned, revealing yellow teeth. "Well now, mister, Sterling said you were pretty—" He lunged. Clara screamed, scrambling backward, but he was too fast. He grabbed her by the coat, hauling her up. His grip was like iron. He smelled of stale tobacco and unwashed sweat. "You're coming with me, girlie," he growled, his hand clamping over her wrist, twisting it until she dropped the knife. "No!" she shrieked, clawing at his face with her free hand. He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Fight all you want. I like fighters." He dragged her toward the edge of the drop-off, intending to pull her down the slope to the horses. Pop! A gunshot rang out from the boulders, the unmistakable sound of the dragoon pistol. The man jerked, but he didn't fall. The bullet had hit him in the shoulder, spinning him around but not stopping him. He roared in rage, releasing Clara to reach for his own gun. Clara saw the knife lying in the snow where she had dropped it. Time seemed to slow down. She saw Elias emerging from the rocks 20 yards away, his face pale, trying to bring the pistol up for a second shot, but he was too far. The man in the wolf coat was raising his Colt. He was going to kill Elias. Clara didn't think. She didn't decide. She simply moved. She dove for the knife. Her fingers closed around the bone handle. She lunged upward, driving the blade with both hands, putting every ounce of her fear, her rage, and her desperation behind the steel. She struck the man in the side, just below the ribs, driving the blade up and in. The man gasped, his eyes going wide with shock. The gun fell from his hand. He looked down at the knife buried in his gut, then at Clara. He tried to speak, but only blood bubbled past his lips. He swayed, his knees buckling, and collapsed sideways into the snow. Clara stood there, freezing. Her hands were covered in red. The knife was still in him. "Clara!" Elias was there. He grabbed her shoulders, spinning her away from the body. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" Clara couldn't speak. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She stared at her hands. I... "It's done," Elias said, his voice hard but urgent. "He's dead. You had to do it." He looked down the slope. The other 2 men lay still in the snow. The ambush was broken. "We have to go," Elias said. "More could be coming. The shots will draw them." He grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the corpse, away from the blood that was steaming in the cold air. "Move, Clara, move!" They ran, without the mule. They had no choice but to move on foot, scrambling down the backside of the ridge into the canyonlands. It was a desolate, alien landscape of red rock and twisted juniper. The snow here was patchy, melting into slick red mud. They didn't stop until the sun was high overhead. They collapsed in the shadow of a sandstone overhang, deep in a narrow, unwinding canyon that felt like a wound in the earth. Elias leaned against the rock, sliding down until he was sitting. His bandage had bled through again, a fresh stain spreading on his shirt. He checked the cylinder of his revolver. 2 shots left. He looked at Clara. She was sitting across from him, her knees pulled to her chest. She had scrubbed her hands with snow, but the phantom stain remained. She was rocking slightly, back and forth. "Clara," he said softly. She didn't look up. "I killed him." "You saved my life," Elias said. "He was going to shoot me, and he was going to take you back to hell." "I felt it," she whispered, her voice hollow. "I felt the knife go in. I felt him. Stop." She looked up then, and her eyes were haunted. The light that had been there when she shot the pine cone, the joy of survival, was gone. In its place was a dark, bruising knowledge of what it meant to take a life. "Is this what it is?" she asked, tears tracking through the dirt on her face. "Is this what survival is? Just killing until there is no one left?" "Sometimes," Elias admitted, closing his eyes. "Sometimes it is just staying alive for 1 more hour, 1 more day." "I don't know if I can do it," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I am not like you, Elias. I am not a soldier. I am just a girl from Boston who wants to paint watercolors and read poetry." "You ain't that girl anymore," Elias said. He reached out, taking her hand. His grip was firm, anchoring her. "You are stronger than her. You are tougher, and you are alive." He squeezed her hand. "We are alive, Clara, and we are going to California. But right now, you need to breathe. Just breathe." Clara looked at him, at the blood on his shirt, at the scar on his face, at the gun in his lap. She looked at the barren red walls of the canyon, trapping them in. She took a breath. It was shaky, ragged, and tasted of dust, but she took another. "Okay," she whispered, though she didn't believe it. "Okay." They sat there in the silence of the canyon, 2 fugitives with blood on their hands, while the sun began its slow descent toward the west, casting long, distorted shadows that looked like reaching fingers. The pursuit was behind them, but the cost of their freedom was getting heavier with every mile. The town of San Perdido clung to the southern edge of the territory like a tick on a mangy dog. It was a collection of sun-bleached timber and adobe rising out of the red dust, a place where the railroad had promised to come but never arrived, leaving behind a population of drifters, prospectors, and those who simply had nowhere else to go. To Clara Whitmore and Elias Boone, it looked like paradise. They rode in on the back of a borrowed wagon, hidden beneath a tarp that smelled of grain and mule sweat. The canyonlands had chewed them up and spat them out, leaving them ragged, sun-scorched, and thinner by half a stone each. Elias's side was a throbbing knot of fire that had settled into a dull, constant ache, and Clara's hands were raw, her fingernails broken, her skin stained with the red earth that refused to wash away. The wagon rattled to a halt behind a structure that leaned precariously against the wind. A faded sign swung above the back door, the Iron Rose Saloon. Elias slipped from the wagon first, his movements stiff. He helped Clara down, his hand lingering on her waist for a heartbeat longer than necessary. They stood in the alley, dust swirling around their boots. "Stay behind me," Elias rasped, "and keep your head down." He knocked on the heavy oak door, 3 sharp raps, a pause, then 2 more. A moment later, a slat slid open. A pair of eyes, hard as marbles and surrounded by a map of wrinkles, peered out. "We're closed," a voice like grinding gravel announced. "Come back at sundown and bring a coin." "It is me, Hetty," Elias said, leaning close to the wood. "I brought trouble." The eyes widened slightly. The bolt slid back with a heavy clunk, and the door swung inward. Hetty was a woman carved from the same granite as the mountains. She stood barely 5 feet tall, but her presence filled the doorway. She wore a man's trousers and a stained apron. Her gray hair pulled back in a severe knot. A scar, old and white, bisected her upper lip. She looked Elias up and down, taking in the blood-stiffened bandage visible through the tear in his shirt, the gauntness of his face, and the haunted look in his eyes. Then she looked at Clara, at the matted hair, the men's clothes that hung off her frame, and the defiant set of her jaw. Trouble ain't the word for it. Hetty grunted. She stepped back. Get in before the flies let the law know you're here. The interior of the saloon was cool and smelled of stale beer, sawdust, and lemon oil. Hetty led them through the main room, past the polished mahogany bar, and into a back storeroom. She shoved a crate aside to reveal a trap door. Cellar, she commanded. It is dry, and the rats mostly stay on the north side. I will bring hot water and whatever food the cook hasn't burned. Elias hesitated. Hetty, we can't pay you yet, but I have furs stashed up north. Shut your mouth. Elias, Hetty snapped, though her hand came up to squeeze his arm, her grip surprisingly gentle. Samuel would haunt me till my dying day if I turned his brother away. Get down there, both of you. For 3 days, the cellar was their world. It was a dim, subterranean space stacked high with barrels of whiskey and crates of dried goods. Hetty brought them blankets, soap, and a pot of stew thick with beef and potatoes. Clara washed the road from her skin in a tin basin, scrubbing until she was pink and raw. She watched Elias change his bandages, wincing at the angry purple edges of the bullet wound. It was healing, but slowly. On the 4th day, Clara climbed the ladder. Hetty was behind the bar, polishing glasses with a rag that looked cleaner than the floor, but not by much. The saloon was empty, save for a drunk sleeping at a corner table. I cannot sit in the dark anymore, Clara said, her voice steady. I will go mad. Let me work. Hetty paused, holding a whiskey tumbler up to the light. She looked at Clara, really looked at her, seeing past the fear and the fatigue to the steel that had formed underneath. Have you ever poured a drink, girl? Hetty asked. I have poured tea for senators and railroad tycoons, Clara replied. I imagine whiskey is not much different, only the conversation is likely more honest. Hetty barked a laugh. Fair enough, but you can't be Clara. That name is too soft for this town. You look like Kate, and you're my niece from back east. Down on her luck. Kate. Clara tested the name. It felt heavy, distinct. Kate works for me. That night, the Iron Rose roared to life. It was a rough crowd, miners with dust in their beards, cattle drovers smelling of leather and horse, and shadows that watched from the corners. Clara, wearing a plain calico dress Hetty had scrounged up, moved through the smoke and noise with a tray balanced on her hip. Her hands shook the first time a miner grabbed her wrist, his fingers rough and presumptuous. Smile for me, darlin', the man slurred, his breath reeking of rot gut. Clara didn't pull away. She didn't scream. She remembered the knife sliding into the bounty hunter's ribs. She remembered the cold wind of the high pass. She leaned down, her voice low and freezing. Let go of my arm, she said, or I will pour this entire pitcher of beer into your lap, and everyone in this room will laugh at you until the day you die. The miner blinked, surprised by the venom in the eyes of this small woman. He let go. Feisty, he muttered, turning back to his cards. Clara straightened, her heart hammering, but she felt a strange, surging power. She was not a porcelain doll on a shelf. She was working. She was earning her keep. She swept floors, wiped tables, and learned to dodge the wandering hands of lonely men. From the shadows of the hallway leading to the storeroom, Elias watched her. He saw the way she held her head high, the way she didn't flinch at the sound of breaking glass. She was blooming in the dirt, vibrant and strong, and the sight of it terrified him more than any bullet. Later that night, after the last patron had stumbled out into the dark, Elias sat with Hetty at the bar. A single kerosene lamp cast long shadows against the walls. I need a horse, Elias said quietly. And supplies. I'm leaving tomorrow night. Hetty stopped wiping the bar. She slammed the rag down. You're leaving? And what about the girl? She stays here, Elias said, staring into his glass. You can use the help. She's safe with you. In a month, when the heat dies down, you can get her on a stage to San Francisco. She can have a life. You are a fool. Elias Boone, Hetty hissed. I fought beside your brother at Glorietta Pass. I saw him take a saber to the arm and keep shooting. He was brave, but he wasn't stupid. You are stupid. I am poison. Hetty, Elias said, his voice cracking. Look at me. Everywhere I go, violence follows. Those men, the ones hunting her, they won't stop. If I am with her, she is a target. If I split off, draw them south toward Mexico, she has a chance. She loves you, Hetty said bluntly. Elias flinched. She is grateful. There is a difference. She is clinging to the raft that kept her from drowning. Once she is on dry land, she will see me for what I am, a broken-down trapper with blood on his hands. Redemption isn't something you find on a map. Elias, Hetty said, leaning over the bar. It is a choice, and that girl, she is your chance at it. You walk away from her, and you are walking away from the only light you have seen in 10 years. I am doing it to save her, Elias insisted. Standing up, have the horse ready. The next afternoon, the atmosphere in San Perdido shifted. The air grew heavy, charged with the static of authority. Clara was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the saloon when 3 riders came down the main street. They were not the dusty, ragged men who usually frequented the town. These men wore long dusters and clean hats. The man in the lead rode a tall gray gelding. On his chest, catching the harsh sunlight, was a silver star. A federal marshal. Clara froze, clutching the broom handle. She forced herself to breathe, to turn slowly and walk back inside. Resisting the urge to run, she went straight to the cellar, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Elias was cleaning his revolver by the light of a candle. He looked up as she scrambled down the ladder. "Law," she whispered. "A marshal." Elias went still. He blew out the candle, plunging them into semi-darkness. "Stay quiet." Upstairs, heavy boots thumped on the floorboards. The saloon went quiet. Clara crept to the grate in the floor that looked up into the main room. She could see only boots and the hem of a duster. "Afternoon," a deep, resonant voice boomed. "I'm Marshal Silas Graves. I'm looking for a fugitive." There was the sound of paper unfolding. Clara Whitmore, the marshal read. Wanted for grand larceny, theft of family heirlooms, and defamation of the Sterling family character. There is a reward of $5,000 for her return. Alive. Hetty's voice was cool and unimpressed. "Don't know her. We get a lot of strays here. Marshal, few of them give real names." "She is traveling with a man," the marshal continued. "Elias Boone, wanted for murder in the state of Colorado, armed and dangerous." The boots moved closer to the bar. "I will be setting up at the sheriff's office for a few days," the marshal said. "If you see them, be a good citizen. 5,000 is a lot of money for a watering hole like this." The boots retreated. The door swung shut. In the cellar, the silence was deafening. Elias struck a match and relit the candle. The flame illuminated his face, which was set in a mask of grim resignation. But it wasn't the marshal he was looking at. It was Clara. "Theft?" he asked softly. "Defamation?" Clara sank onto a crate, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't steal anything, just the horse, and I lost him. And the coat." "That ain't what the poster says. Clara, why would they charge you with larceny?" "To make me a criminal," she whispered. "If I am just a runaway bride, people might help me. If I am a thief, I am property of the law." Elias stared at her. "Is there anything else? Anything you didn't tell me?" Clara looked up. Her eyes were wet. "I lied," she admitted. "About my father. He wasn't just a miner who got into debt. He was a railroad man. Like Sterling, he was a partner." Elias stiffened. "A partner?" "He helped survey the land," Clara said, the words rushing out now. "He helped drive the families off the homesteads to make way for the tracks. He knew what Ambrose was. He knew Ambrose beat his first wife. He knew, and he made the deal anyway because he wanted the merger. He wanted power." She stood up, pacing the small space. "And I agreed to it," she confessed, her voice breaking. "At first, I thought I could handle him. I thought I could be the wife of a rich man and use that money to do good. I was vain. I was arrogant. I thought I could change him." She stopped, looking at Elias with pleading eyes. Then he hurt me. He hit me because I spoke out of turn at a dinner. And I saw that I wasn't a partner to him. I was just another thing he owned. So I ran, but I am not innocent. Elias, I was part of their world. I benefited from the things they did to people like you." She waited for him to turn away. She waited in disgust. She waited for him to see the spoiled, complicit socialite beneath the dirt. Elias stood up. He crossed the cellar in 2 strides. He didn't strike her. He didn't yell. He grabbed her by the shoulders and pulled her hard against his chest. "You were a child in a den of vipers," he rumbled into her hair. "You woke up. That is what matters. I lied to you," she sobbed into his shirt. "We are both liars. Clara," he said, pulling back to look at her. He cupped her face in his large, rough hands. "I lied when I said I was just a trapper. I lied when I said I wanted to leave you. We are both liars. But looking at you right now, I still see who you really are. You are the woman who shot a pine cone to splinters. You are the woman who dragged me up a mountain. You are the woman who saved my life." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision. It was a desperate affirmation of life in the face of the cage waiting for them upstairs. Clara clung to him, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. The fear of the marshal, the shame of her past, the coldness of the future. It all burned away in the heat of his touch. They sank onto the pile of blankets in the corner. There was no hesitation this time, no tentative exploration. They moved together with a fierce, frantic rhythm, holding onto each other as if they were the only solid things in a dissolving world. Elias worshipped her with his hands, with his mouth, tracing every scar and every curve, murmuring her name like a prayer. Clara met him with equal force, demanding his weight, his presence, anchoring him to the earth. "I love you," she whispered in the dark, the words tasting of salt and sweat. "I love you, Elias. I'm here," he answered, his voice rough. "I'm right here." Morning came too soon, bringing with it a harsh, unforgiving light. Elias was up before dawn. He moved with a frantic energy, packing the saddlebags Hetty had left by the trap door. "We leave tonight," he told Clara, who was sitting up, wrapped in a blanket. "Hetty has a wagon leaving for Santa Fe. We can hide in the back. The marshal. We'll be gone before he finishes his breakfast." But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Just after sunrise, a commotion erupted in the alleyway behind the saloon. Elias froze. He motioned for Clara to stay back and crept up the ladder. He cracked the trap door open an inch. "Hey, you're there!" a voice shouted. Elias looked out. A deputy, young, nervous, and holding a scattergun, was standing by the back door. He was staring right at the saddlebags Elias had stupidly left near the entrance while packing. "That is the bag described in the report," the deputy yelled. "Marshal, I found the gear." "Damn it," Elias swore. He dropped the trap door and turned to Clara. "They found the gear. They know we are here." "What do we do?" Clara asked, her face pale. "I drew them off," Elias said instantly. "There is a window in the storeroom. You climb out, run for the livery stable. Hetty will help you." "No!" Clara grabbed his arm. "I am not leaving you. Clara, listen to me." Elias grabbed her face. "I am the one they want for murder. You are just a runaway. If they catch me, I hang. If you run, you live." "I will not let you hang." Before she could argue further, the back door of the saloon smashed open. "Federal Marshal!" Graves' voice boomed. "Come out with your hands visible." Elias shoved Clara toward the shadows of the wine rack. "Hide. Don't make a sound." He climbed the ladder. He kicked the trap door open and surged up into the storeroom, his hands raised. "Don't shoot!" he yelled. "I'm coming out!" Clara watched through the cracks in the floorboards, tears streaming down her face. As 3 men swarmed Elias, they slammed him against the wall. She saw the flash of handcuffs. She saw the marshal, a towering man with a face like granite, grab Elias by the hair and slam his face into the wood. "Where's the girl?" Graves demanded. "Gone," Elias spat, blood running from his nose. "She took a horse and rode south 2 days ago. I stayed behind to drink." "Liar," Graves said calmly. He pistol-whipped Elias. A brutal, efficient strike. Elias crumpled to the floor. "Take him to jail. Search the building. Tear it apart board by board." The deputies dragged Elias away. Clara stood in the dark cellar, trembling. She heard the heavy boots beginning to move toward the trap door. She didn't run. She didn't hide. A cold, crystalline calm settled over her. It was the same calm she had felt when she plunged the knife into the bounty hunter. It was the realization that she had power, if only she was brave enough to use it. She moved to the corner where her discarded saddlebag lay. She tore it open. She pulled out the remnants of the wedding dress. It was ruined, shredded, stained with mud and blood. She couldn't wear it. Instead, she pulled out the one thing she had kept from her old life, a heavy, velvet cloak with a silver clasp, and a small, leather-bound journal with the Whitmore family crest embossed on the cover. She smoothed her hair. She wiped the tears from her face. She put on the cloak, fastening it at her throat. It didn't hide the men's trousers or the work boots, but it gave her a silhouette of authority. She climbed the ladder. She walked out of the storeroom, right past the startled deputies who were just preparing to descend. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice ringing with the imperious tone of a Boston heiress. She walked into the main barroom. Hetty was standing there, holding a shotgun, looking ready to kill. "Clara?" Hetty whispered. "Kate is gone," Clara said. "My name is Clara Whitmore, and I have business with the marshal." She walked down the center of the main street. People stopped and stared. She was a strange sight, a woman in rough clothes and a velvet cloak, walking with the stride of a queen. She reached the sheriff's office. The door was open. Inside, Marshal Graves was sitting at the desk, cleaning his knuckles with a handkerchief. Elias was slumped in a chair, blood dripping from his nose, his hands cuffed behind him. When Clara walked in, the room went silent. Elias lifted his head. His eyes went wide. "Clara, run!" "Quiet, Elias," she said gently. She turned to the marshal. She pulled the hood of her cloak down, revealing her face, pale, dirty, but undeniably aristocratic. "I am Clara Whitmore," she announced, "daughter of Archibald Whitmore, owner of the Eastern Seaboard Rail Company, and the fiancée of Ambrose Sterling." The marshal stood up slowly. He looked at her, then at the poster on his desk. "You are the fugitive," Graves said. "I am," Clara said, "and I'm here to negotiate." "Negotiate?" Graves scoffed. "You are under arrest, Miss Whitmore. You don't have any leverage." "I have my name," Clara said coldly. "And I have the truth. I am prepared to return with you. I will go back to Boston. I will face Ambrose. I will sign whatever papers they want," Elias groaned. "No, Clara, don't do it." Clara ignored him, locking eyes with the marshal. "But here is the price. You drop the charges against Mr. Boone. You release him immediately. And you ensure he has safe passage out of this territory." "He is wanted for murder," Graves said. "He protected a woman of high standing from bandits and wolves." Clara lied smoothly. "If you hang him, I will tell every newspaper from here to New York that the federal marshal allowed my savior to die because of a bureaucratic error. My father has friends in Washington. Marshal, powerful friends. Do you want to be the man who saved the Whitmore heiress, or the man who destroyed her reputation and her sanity?" She stepped closer, placing the leather-bound journal on the desk. "This book contains my diary," she said. "It details every abuse I suffered at the hands of the Sterling family. If you take us both in, this book goes to the press. If you let him go, I burn it." It was a bluff. The book was nothing but bad poetry and sketches of horses. But Graves didn't know that. He looked at the velvet cloak. He looked at the fire in her eyes. He weighed the political nightmare of a scandal against the simple hanging of a drifter. Graves looked at Elias, then back at Clara. "Will you come quietly?" he asked. "No tricks. I give you my word as a Whitmore." Clara said. "Clara! No!" Elias shouted, straining against the cuffs. "I won't let you do this. Let me rot. Don't go back to him." Clara turned to Elias. She walked over to him, her heart breaking in her chest. She reached out and touched his battered face. "It is the only way," she whispered. "You gave me my life. Elias, now let me give you yours." She leaned down and kissed his forehead. "I love you," she said softly. Then she turned back to the marshal and held out her wrists. "Unlock him," she commanded, "and put the chains on me." Marshal Graves stood behind his desk, the heavy oak surface serving as the only barrier between the law and the chaotic force of nature that was Clara Whitmore. The office smelled of gun oil, stale coffee, and the lingering dust of the street. He looked at the leather-bound journal Clara had placed on the wood, then at the defiant tilt of her chin, and finally at Elias Boone, who sat slumped in the chair, blood drying on his lip, watching the woman he loved barter her life for his. The marshal was a pragmatic man. He had survived 20 years in a territory that swallowed soft men whole. He knew the difference between a criminal and a desperate soul. But more importantly, he knew the difference between justice and a political firestorm. If he dragged Clara back to Boston, dragged her kicking and screaming to a family that treated her like chattel, and if she truly did have the ear of the press, or worse, her father's enemies in the Senate, his career would end in a flurry of telegrams and scandals. He picked up the wanted poster for Elias Boone. He looked at the sketch, which bore a passing resemblance to the battered man in the chair. And then he looked at the poster for Clara. "You play a dangerous game, Miss Whitmore," Graves rumbled, his voice filling the small room. "It is not a game," Clara replied, her voice steady, though her hands hidden beneath the velvet cloak were trembling. "It is a transaction. My silence for his life. My freedom for your peace of mind." Graves leaned back, the wood of his chair groaning. He looked at Elias. "And you, Boone? Are you willing to let her do this? Walk back into the lion's den so you can go back to your traps?" Elias strained against the cuffs, his eyes blazing. "I would rather hang than let her go back to them. Don't listen to her. Marshal, send her west. Send her anywhere but Boston." Graves sighed. He rubbed his temples with a calloused thumb and forefinger. The jail was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. "Here is the problem," Graves said slowly. "I don't like Ambrose Sterling. I met him once in Denver. He struck a horse with a cane because it shied at a train whistle. A man who hurts an animal because it is scared is a man with a rot in his soul." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street of San Perdito. "And I don't like the idea of a woman being sold like a parcel of land. It goes against the grain of why we came out here." He turned back to them. His face was hard, unreadable. "But I am a lawman. I cannot just let a murderer and a thief walk out the front door because I have a soft spot for romance." Clara held her breath. Elias went still. "However," Graves continued, walking back to the desk. He picked up the wanted poster for Clara. He struck a match against the sole of his boot and held the flame to the corner of the paper. They watched in silence as the face of Clara Whitmore curled and blackened, turning to ash in the marshal's hand. He dropped the burning remnant into the spittoon. "The telegraph lines are down," Graves lied, his eyes locking with Clara's. "A storm in the past took them out. It will take a week to repair them. By the time I can wire confirmation of your capture, it is possible that the fugitives, who were heavily armed and desperate, escaped custody and fled south into the Mexico territories." Clara felt her knees go weak. "Marshal?" Graves picked up the keyring from his belt. He walked around the desk and unlocked Elias's cuffs. The metal clicked open, and Elias rubbed his wrists, looking at the marshal in disbelief. "I am dropping the charges," Graves said, his voice low and dangerous. "But there are conditions, strict ones." "Name them," Elias rasped, standing up and moving instantly to Clara's side, putting his body between her and the lawman. "You vanish," Graves commanded. "You leave San Perdito within the hour. You do not go north. You do not go east. You go west, or you go south, but you never, ever come back to this region. If I see your face in this territory again, Boone, I will hang you. If I hear the name Clara Whitmore whispered in a saloon, I will send a telegram to Ambrose Sterling myself." "We will go," Elias promised. You will never see us again." Graves nodded. He picked up the leather-bound journal from the desk and handed it back to Clara. "I suspect there's not much in there but sketches of horses," Graves said dryly. "But keep it. You might want to write a better ending for yourself one day." Clara took the book. She looked at the marshal, searching for the words to thank a man who had just given them their lives, but found none that seemed adequate. "Go," Graves said, sitting back down and pulling a stack of paperwork toward him. "Before I remember that I am sworn to uphold the statutes of the United States government." They walked out of the office and into the blinding sun. The air tasted different. It tasted sharp, clean, and impossibly sweet. In the alleyway behind the saloon, the departure was hurried and hushed. The wagon Hetty had arranged was waiting, loaded with supplies: flour, beans, coffee, and ammunition. 2 sturdy horses, bays with deep chests and strong legs, were saddled and ready. Hetty stood by the back door, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked older in the daylight, the lines of her face mapped deep by years of hard survival. But her eyes were bright. "You got everything?" she asked Elias, her voice gruff to hide the emotion. "Yes," Elias said. He checked the cinch on the saddle, his movements efficient and practiced. He turned to Hetty. Thank you, Hetty, for everything." Hetty waved a dismissive hand. "Get out of here, you fool, and try not to get shot again. It ruins the shirts." She turned to Clara. Clara was standing by her horse, adjusting the stirrup leather. She had discarded the velvet cloak. She wore a canvas duster now, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and a pair of sturdy riding boots Hetty had found. She looked nothing like the girl who had fled the church. She looked like a woman of the frontier. Hetty walked over to her. She reached into the deep pocket of her apron and pulled out a heavy object wrapped in an oilcloth. "Here," Hetty said, pressing it into Clara's hands. Clara unwrapped it. It was a Colt Navy revolver. The steel blue and cold. The grip smooth walnut. It was well oiled and balanced. "I cannot take this," Clara said. "This is yours." "I have a shotgun behind the bar and a derringer in my boot," Hetty said. "I am fine. You are going into the wild, girl. And out there, a woman without a gun is just a victim waiting to happen." Clara gripped the weapon. It felt heavy, but it felt right. It felt like insurance. Hetty reached out and gripped Clara's chin, forcing her to look up. "You listen to me," Hetty said fiercely. "Elias is a hard man. He's broken in places that might never heal right. He carries ghosts around like other men carry pocket watches. But he loves you. I have known that boy since he was knee-high, and I have never seen him look at anything the way he looks at you." Hetty's eyes softened. "Men like him, men who will bleed for you, who will walk through fire just to keep the wind off your back, they don't come around twice. You keep him. You hear me? You hold on to him tight." "I will," Clara whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I promise." "Good." Hetty stepped back. She slapped the rump of Clara's horse. "Now ride, and don't look back. There is nothing back here for you but dust." Clara mounted. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter she'd been carrying since Boston, the last letter from her father, begging her to be reasonable, to think of the family name. She looked at the envelope, stained with sweat and travel. She thought of the library where he wrote it, the smell of cigar smoke and judgment. She tore it in half, then in quarters. She opened her hand and let the wind take the pieces, scattering the white confetti into the red dirt of the alley. "Ready?" Elias asked. He was mounted, looking at her, his silhouette cut sharp against the sun. "Ready," Clara said. They kicked their horses into a trot, leaving the alley, leaving the saloon, leaving San Perdido. They did not look back at the town that had been their prison and their salvation. They looked south, where the horizon stretched out in a shimmering, endless line of blue and gold. The desert was a vast, indifferent ocean of stone and scrub. For 3 days they rode through a landscape that defied scale. Great mesas of red rock rose from the earth like the ruins of ancient cathedrals, their flat tops scouring the belly of the sky. The sun was a hammer, beating down on them with a relentless, white heat. But the wind was cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. They spoke little during the days. The silence of the desert was too large to fill with idle chatter. It was a silence that stripped a person down to their marrow. Clara rode beside Elias, watching the way he scanned the horizon, the way his body moved in rhythm with the horse. They were no longer hunted. There were no bounty hunters on their trail, no marshals with posters. But the freedom felt strange, almost heavy. They were carrying the weight of what they had done, the lives taken, the lies told, the identities shed like snakeskin. They were haunted. Yes, Clara still saw the face of the man she had stabbed when she closed her eyes at night. Elias still flinched at sudden noises, his hand drifting to his gun. But the ghosts were growing quieter with every mile they put between themselves and the past. On the fourth evening, they made camp on a high plateau overlooking a vast canyon system that bled purple and indigo in the twilight. The air was thin and cold here, crisp with the promise of frost. Elias built a fire from dried juniper wood. The flames crackled and popped, sending sparks drifting up toward the first stars. They sat on the blanket, shoulders touching, eating the simple meal of beans and coffee. "We will cross the border tomorrow," Elias said quietly. "Into the territories. The maps don't mean much down there." "Good," Clara said. She took a sip of the bitter coffee. "I am done with maps." Elias set his cup down. He turned to her. The firelight caught the jagged scar on his cheek, painting it in relief. But to Clara, it was just a part of the terrain of his face, as familiar and beloved as the lines of the mountains. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. "Clara," he said, his voice thick. She turned. In his palm lay a ring. It was not gold. It was not silver. It was carved from the antler of a deer, polished smooth until it gleamed like old ivory. It was simple, rough-hewn, and imperfect. He had carved it in the quiet moments of their journey, whittling away the bone while she slept, pouring his intent into every scrape of the knife. "I ain't got money," Elias said, staring at the ring in his hand. "I ain't got a house. I ain't got a name that is worth a damn in polite society. I am a man with a lot of scars and a lot of miles on him." He looked up, meeting her eyes. His gaze was naked, stripped of all defense. "But I got this, and I got two hands that will work for you until they can't work anymore. I got a heart that beats only because you are near it." He took her left hand. His fingers were rough, calloused from a lifetime of labor and war. But his touch was reverent. "This ring, it is bone. It is part of the wild. It endures. It lasts through the winter." He slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "It is the only promise I know how to make. Clara, I promise to endure with you. Through the cold, through the dark, until the end." Clara looked at the ring. It was stark white against her sun-browned skin. It was beautiful. It was more beautiful than the diamond Ambrose Sterling had tried to force onto her finger. A diamond that had felt like a shackle. This felt like an anchor. Tears spilled over her lashes, hot and fast. She didn't try to stop them. "I don't want another life," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't want the silk. I don't want safety. I don't want a husband who looks at me and sees an acquisition." She gripped Elias's hand, interlacing her fingers with his. "I want the dust," she said fiercely. "I want the wind. I want the fire. And I want you. This life, this hard, wild life with you. It is enough. It is everything." Elias let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 10 years. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was not a kiss of desperation, like in the cave. It was not a kiss of goodbye, like in the sheriff's office. It was a kiss of arrival. It was slow, deep, and tasting of smoke and promise. He pulled her down onto the blankets. The sky above them was a vast dome of obsidian scattered with diamonds, the Milky Way arching like a bridge of light across the dark. In the quiet of the desert night, under the gaze of 1,000,000 ancient stars, they held each other. They made love with a slow, fierce tenderness, a reclaiming of their souls. There was no shame here, no past, no future, only the heat of their skin, the beat of their hearts, and the knowledge that they had walked through the valley of the shadow of death and come out the other side, together. They slept wrapped in a single blanket, shielded from the wind by their own embrace. Two specks of warmth in the infinite wilderness. Dawn broke over the canyon lands, painting the world in violent strokes of ochre and crimson. Clara woke first. She watched the light creep across Elias's face. He looked younger in his sleep. The lines of worry smoothed away. She touched the bone ring on her finger, feeling its solidity. "Morning," Elias rumbled, his eyes opening. "Morning." She smiled. They broke camp with the efficiency of a team that moved as one. They saddled the horses, kicked dirt over the fire, and mounted up. The trail ahead led south, winding down into the valley floor and toward the haze of the borderlands. It was a land of unknowns. There were no guarantees out there. There would be storms. There would be droughts. There would be hard days where they went hungry and cold nights where they questioned their sanity. But as Clara looked at Elias, and as he looked back at her with a crooked, rare smile, she knew they would face it all. They were scarred souls, chipped and weathered by the world, but they were free, and they were together. "Where to?" Clara asked, the wind catching the brim of her hat. Elias looked south, toward the endless horizon. "Wherever the trail goes," he said. Clara laughed, a sound that rang clear and joyous in the empty air. She spurred her horse, and Elias followed. They rode down the slope, side by side, disappearing into the vast, beautiful, terrible wilderness, leaving nothing behind but hoofprints in the sand that the wind would soon scrub away. They were ghosts to the world they left behind, but to each other. They were finally, completely real. Thank you for journeying with Clara and Elias through the storms, the snow, and the redemption of the high frontier. It has been a pleasure to weave this tale of survival and love for you. If this story captured your imagination, please leave a comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to know how far this story has traveled. Do you think Elias and Clara will find peace in Mexico? Share your thoughts in English. And if you want to hear more tales of grit, gunpowder, and romance from the American frontier, please subscribe to From Wild West. There are many more campfire stories waiting to be told. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your eyes on the horizon.